As we continue the readings from Genesis, I mean, it's like, well, obviously, great movies have been made about this, great stories, great paintings. And this particular day, just a little background, we know that Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers because they were jealous of him. His father favored Joseph. And remember the coat of many colors, he gave that to his son. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but ink, paint, dye were very expensive. And for him to get a coat made with many, many colors was hot stuff. The rest of them wore, it sounds a little ironic, but the rest, if they had a coat, it was fur. It was animal fur. But the coat of many colors had to be handmade for Joseph. That's one of the indications that why Joseph was the envy of his brothers. So when they had had enough, they sold him. They put him down in a cistern, and when an Egyptian caravan went by, they sold him. Well, the problem is they didn't know Joseph was one of God's chosen. He was going to be one of God's patriarchs and anointed. So you know the story. He went into Egypt, and the Egyptian Pharaoh adopted him, and he grew up powerful, and he was very bright. There's so many things associated with his wisdom and interpretations. But this piece is he's sending his brothers back to his father, and it's placed here paralleling the gospel where Jesus is sending his brothers, the apostles, to the world, not only his father, but to the world. And the irony of it, it's funny because Jesus tells his apostles to heal and just, if people are peaceful, they welcome you. If they don't, to hell with them, leave the town. He doesn't say that, I say that. So it parallels what's going on in the Old Testament. So Joseph's brothers are revealed. Joseph finds out who they are, and the reason they're in Egypt is because there was starvation and drought in Canaan. So their father sent him to Egypt to get food, and he kept back his second favorite son because they were from the original mother, and the other sons are from the first marriage. So he kept that one there because he was the youngest son, and he was favored, and he was spoiled, and the brothers didn't like him either, but they went to Egypt to get food for the father. And then when Joseph realizes who they are, long story, he reveals himself to them. Now they had to be shocked. They threw him in a cistern ages ago. And the old man, the father, grew up not knowing where he was, and he thought he was eaten in the wilderness by the animals. The power that the Pharaoh imbued onto Joseph was amazing. He had total control. And what a shock it must have been to the Pharaoh to realize this guy's an Israelite. He's part of the slave trade that we have. And the irony of it was very strange. Pharaoh allows Joseph to do what he does, and Joseph lets some of the brothers go, but he keeps the one there. And as he keeps one, he promises, he really wanted to see his father, bring the father back. And they are reconciled. He reveals who he is, and he forgives his brothers. Many years had to pass for them not to recognize him. So he was a kid dumped in a cistern, and now he's second in command under the Pharaoh. And he forgives them. And he says, send my message back. Go to your father. And the story continues, of course, but this piece is so important that he lets them know who he is and forgives their deed. Is it betrayal? Is it murder? Attempted murder? Is it slave trade? And as we hear that, we realize there's a movie that just came out. It's been 2 years in the making about the same kind of conditions of slave trade. Slave trade. It's called Sound of Freedom. And it follows one particular man and his attempt to rescue children who are literally sold today. This is like thousands of years ago, this story, when Joseph was put in a hole and abandoned and then sold to the Egyptians, and they took him back to Egypt. That story ended well, but he was still a part of a slave trade action. And that's going on in our country today. And the Sound of Freedom is one little insight into the spreading of the message. It's one little insight into how horrible this experience is. It's interesting that this reading today reflects that in some way. That, as the actor in the movie says, no child of God can be sold. And it goes back thousands of years. Joseph was sold into slavery. No child of God can be sold. So God, in his way and his wisdom, rescues Joseph, gives Joseph a very prominent position, then allows Joseph to go to his betrayers, his family, and forgive them. That's a good ending. The story of The Sound of Freedom has a good ending because he personally traces that history of one boy and one girl, brother and sister, that was snatched from a southern country. So that's a good story. But there are hundreds of thousands of children sold into slavery today throughout the world. And regrettably, the United States is one of the biggest perpetrators of buying children of slavery for exploitation in many, many ways. We've got to be aware. God spoke to us centuries ago through the scriptures and indicated his reaction to selling a child. Didn't like it. That story was going to punish all the perpetrators, the brothers. He intervened through the goodness of Joseph and, of course, by the power of the Holy Spirit within Joseph. But we can't forgive the slave traders today. We have to bring them to justice, and whoever our leaders are that support this end of slave trade, as going from the UN to our own country, we need to voice our opinions as Christians. And we're doing no more than the scriptures are mandating us to do. So Jesus is sending us out and says, you're not going to get paid for doing goodness. God will pay you. Ask for no money. Bring peace, bring healing. And that's what we're still mandated to do. We read the scriptures, and sometimes it's like, these are old stories. Not so. This 1200 BC story about Abraham and his children is current.